Um, yeah, this brings me to our next speaker. Very versatile, just true gentleman, and yeah, I'll talk a little bit about Mr. Ashish Thakur. So he's a counseling psychologist from a clinic called Mind Temple, owned by Dr. Anjali Chabria. It's very close to my heart. I've been there personally working with her for nearly 10 years. And I do miss that. That was my second home. My mom used to always tease me. So he has completed an undergrad in commerce, and he did his master's in business and human resources. Like I said, truly versatile. He then decided to study his counseling psychology in mental health and wellness from New York University. And post that, it is definitely our benefit as well to have you do and complete this course, because we can have now you as a speaker speak on this topic and share all your true knowledge with us. He's been a winner of the Adrian Levy Award in New York University. He's been valedictorian speaker at New York University again, and he has worked with at New York at the Crime Victim Treatment Center that focused on working on trauma, grief, loss, and yes. So his approach is a Carl Rogers approach, which is a human-centered approach. And yeah, like I said, we are very happy to have him here. So just a round of applause for Mr. Ashish Thakur.
So good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes. There are going to be certain things that you're going to find repetitive all through the day. There will be statistics. Louder. There's going to be certain things you're going to find repetitive all through the day. It's going to be statistics. It's going to be numbers. It's going to be thoughts. It's going to be feelings. It's going to be emotion. And I know that each speaker here, even though we haven't gone through what each one of us is presenting, is going to talk about those things. And the reason behind that is that the human mind forgets what it is uncomfortable with. And the human mind needs to be reminded again and again and again of things that put us at a lack of ease. So I'm going to also try and keep this session a little interactive, and I would appreciate it if you respond, because it's going to become otherwise one way, and you're going to reach a saturation point by the time you're at the third or fourth speaker, because there's so much of information, there's so much of data. It is a intense subject. So, comprehending suicide. And when Gayatri was speaking, I was just thinking for myself, once again, how is it possible to comprehend suicide? The act of someone intentionally taking his or her own life. Now, that is going to be one of the themes that I am going to speak about today. I have a question for you. Any Harry Potter fans here? Few Harry Potter fans, right? We've heard of Harry Potter though, right? How many have not heard of Harry Potter? So everyone has. There's a character in the Harry Potter series where J.K. Rowling says, "He who shall not be named." Who's that character, Harry Potter fans? Lord Voldemort. He who shall not be named. What do you, when you see that expression all through the 5, 6 episodes, what do you experience? You know, every time someone makes a reference to Lord Voldemort, it goes, shh, he who shall not be named. Suicide in Indian society has been like this Lord Voldemort. You know, fear, apprehension. I don't want to take that name. I don't want to talk about that experience. Look at it from afar. And yet here we are at a conference on suicide prevention. So thank you to Sisters Living Works, to Gayatri, but to each one of you here today who are willing to talk about and touch, to name suicide. You know, I used to refer to it as the S word, because it used to be so hard for me at one point of time to myself name it. So my understanding of suicide essentially comes from being a suicide survivor myself. My mother died by suicide in 1990. And ever since, the S word in the family, in the circles that I would be, would be like, shh, you don't talk about it. You kind of, every time there was a reference to what had happened, and I'm saying what had happened and not naming it just to bring out the feeling that it would be, I'm like, why are you demonizing her? Why are you characterizing her by just her end or the manner in which she chose to end it? Like, I remember people would get so uncomfortable, and I would want to talk, I would want to ask, I would want to share, I would want to hear. One of the factors of understanding suicide is getting comfortable with the uncomfortable. So, one would think that why would one want to try and understand such a heart-wrenching experience as suicide? Because like Gayatri shared, an Indian study said that the highest suicides in India are in the age category of 15 to 29, followed by the age group of 30 to 44. And India reports one of the largest number of suicide rates, especially with the youth. And then a 1,000-mile journey begins with one step, and the number 10,000 begins with one. So we're very fortunate that we've come such a long way, even though we have a very long way to go, that we've had experts like Dr. Anjali, Dr. Hari Shetty, who we'll see this evening, Gayatri, and so many people around the country take initiatives at the micro level to sort of begin to help sensitize us to the uncomfortable Lord Voldemort of suicide. I recall reading a statement made by a Japanese philosopher. Shweta, is this working? I'm gonna continue nonetheless, till they figure out the slides. The PPT is honestly the last part of my, the most least of priorities. Yeah. So there's a Japanese philosopher, 13th century Japan, who said, life itself is the most precious of all treasures in the universe. And not even all treasures in the universe can be compared to the value of one single human life. Now, this statement, kind of touched me when I read it first because it was very simple and yet very profound. Thank you. And yet it brought me to this conflict that if man's basic, and when I use the term man, please know I'm not referring to men, I'm referring to humankind. When we do our psychology papers, we're like him stroke her. It'll become quite boring if I keep going that way, so please bear with that. It brought me to this conflict that if the very basic instinct of human beings is self-preservation, and if life is supposed to be the most precious of all treasures, then what is it that makes an individual conflict with this very basic instinct and ignore or kind of be able to consciously put aside this treasure called life? So suicide, like I shared earlier, is the act of consciously, intentionally ending one's life. The person makes a conscious decision to end his or her life. Now, comprehending this intentional decision to end one's own life is like trying to get into the other person's psyche, trying to understand that other person's thought process. It is about confronting our dis-ease. The word disease, D-I-S-E-A-S-E, is actually comes from D-I-S/E-A-S-E. I am at lack of ease with my own self. If I have to try and understand the reason, or why did someone choose to kill himself or herself or die by suicide consciously? Now, one of our speakers today, the title of her presentation is A Silent Epidemic. Suicide is an epidemic. We just choose to look away. Day before yesterday, there's a 17-year-old girl in North Bombay from a school which I would not name for reasons, you would understand. She jumped from the 17th floor. And I was talking to a friend of mine whose son goes to the same school, and he was telling me, Ashish uncle, I don't understand why would she want to do this? Like, why? Of course I heard him out. And it took me back to one point, which is when we begin to understand the why, the how will follow. We need to understand suicide. We need to get it right, or at least not get it wrong. And this conference is an attempt for each one of us here to get it, or at least not get it wrong. Because unless there is an acceptance, there will be no understanding. And unless there is understanding, there can be no prevention. So, suicidal ideation is essentially, what in the psychological psychiatric community is called a cry for help. Someone is saying, is presenting. If if you see what an iceberg is, there's a certain section which is visible above water. That tip of the iceberg is this cry for help. And we begin to focus on this tip, suicide, without understanding that there's a lot that lies below that surface. Have you ever seen a swan floating on a lake, in a lake? Anyone? I'm sure we can imagine it. What is the image that comes to your mind if I ask you to think about a swan? Please. I'm sorry? Grace, okay. What else? Okay. What else? Absolutely beautiful white thing on a still lake. I'm sorry? Okay. So when you see this swan, or you imagine this swan, on a lake, this graceful poise, almost like the perfect yoga pose. I'm the bad example of it. Floating on the lake, graceful, calm, composed. What you see is what is above the surface. What you're not seeing is how furiously it is paddling below the surface in order to keep afloat and swim. So, if a person on the surface, it's hard to talk and it's hard to sort of share, I want to die by suicide, I want to kill myself. If the person presents, shares, talks about that, and if that is the tip of the iceberg, then imagine, or try and imagine, how furiously would he or she be paddling below the surface to stay afloat, just to stay afloat. I recall someone in session talking about his suicidal ideation to me, and the parents had been making a lot of suggestions to him, do this, do that, etc. And he was like, I'm barely managing to keep afloat. The reality does not lie on the surface. It lies deep down in the depths of the ocean. So, that brought me to a question that, there is this concept of concealed depression, concealed suicidal ideation, psychological and mental conditions which are not visible. And any one of us would ask ourselves, so how am I supposed to reach out or be sensitive or respond to someone where there is hidden intent or concealed ideation? We're all, when I say we're all, please don't take it personally, but I'm referring to like the human race. We're all masters at masking. We're all masters at being the Phantom of the Opera. Beautiful masks, beautiful presentations outside. How does one identify? Often with people who we know, we kind of begin to get sensitized to the fact that, listen, something is off. You're not your usual self. What's going on with you? And you'll see these sort of changes reflected on the emotional front, on the cognitive front, on the somatic front, on the motivational front. And I want to just briefly touch on some of the things that you can look out for. You will see motivational changes with the lack of interest, inertia. Someone who's been pretty gung-ho about things suddenly is like lifeless, listless. Is like blah. These days, the millennials, I learned a new term, meh. Like the first time, one of my young clients told me, oh, I'm feeling meh. I had to ask her, what is that supposed to mean? MEH. And then there is what you see on the emotional front: sadness, crying episodes, lack of interest. On the cognitive front, low self-esteem, anxiety, feelings of inadequacy. And on the somatic front, you know, I'm aching, I'm paining, I'm tired, I've slept for 3 days and I'm still exhausted. Disturbed sleep patterns. In the family, and I'm a very big proponent of, what Gayatri said, the family and friends are the first line of observation. You're actually empowered to be the best sensitization front to the person, because you're gonna be able to observe some of these things because you're at close quarters with this person. You often hear in families, kya ho raha hai? What is going on with you? Like you don't seem yourself. And we brush it aside. So I once again want to touch on the statement I made a little while ago, which was, when the why is clear, the how will follow. And of course, it doesn't mean going on barging. Our way of expressing our concern is, why are you feeling like this? Why are you feeling like this? Why are you feeling like this? Tell me, tell me, tell me, tell me, tell me. Wrong strategy. So if I had to use the analogy of the law of cause and effect, there is a cause, there is an effect. If suicidal ideation is the effect, if a person wants to intentionally end his or her life, then why am I not making the attempt to understand the cause behind it? And of course, the human mind is a mini cosmos in itself, and it may not be possible to sort of understand everything because it doesn't resonate with my line of thinking. But that is why I spoke about this aspect of, I need to accept even though I may not understand. There's this concept that makes up an integral part of my presentation today, which is called this concept of radical acceptance. Because like I said, unless you accept something, you cannot understand it or make the attempt to understand it. And then you cannot be a proponent of prevention. It is only when the why is clear will the how follow. Now, how do you understand the why behind someone who wants to kill himself? It's a hard process. I personally struggled for very many years, to sort of for myself begin to try and understand, why would she want to kill herself? And I did get some answers, I didn't get some answers. But as a professional, or as someone today who works with individuals with suicidal ideation, I would like to share and present to you all some of the points that we need to be aware of as to why does a person want to kill himself or herself. So Gayatri spoke about a few points earlier, but I'd like to run us through. There's mental illness. That by itself is such a massive taboo in Indian society. Depression, oh my gosh, don't talk about it. Bipolar disorder, he is bipolar, oh my God. Schizophrenia, OMG, written him off. Somewhere later on I'm going to quote this line, but I'd like to bring it organically right now, is when you have a fracture, you don't go OMG, right? You go to the orthopedic and get it checked out. You do whatever has to be done. Why the difference when it comes to a condition? And I normally don't like to address mental illness as illness, and yet I tell people, don't buffer it. Because the more you buffer it, the farther away you take yourself from impacting and creating change. So there is increased stress levels. How many of us feel this high stress in today's world? Work, studies, competition, 99.9% performance appraisal, projects. I of course, I'm one of the fortunate ones, and Shweta will agree to it, because I have Anjali telling me, listen, when you're taking time off, like, aren't you working too hard? Too many long hours, change your appointments for tomorrow. Grief, loss, and bereavement. Indian society, has the concept of you grieve for 12 days, and 13th day onwards you're supposed to get back to life, as if the loss of the individual didn't happen. It's stuck here in your throat. Bullying, school, college, some of our most esteemed campuses in the country have reported students dying by suicide on account of physical, mental, emotional, psychological, and sexual bullying. Failure. This can never change. My life is defined by this, or was defined by this. Financial setbacks, and like Gayatri shared, sometimes we feel the educated are more sort of empowered to understand, but you'll also find a lot of suicides taking place in the upper class or the social strata, and farmer suicides. I was talking to someone a couple of days ago, and we were talking about the US elections, with how each candidate kind of saying, we've got to do away with student loans. Students need their loans to be pardoned so that they can start their professions clear slate. And I was just thinking, in India, farmer loans need to be written off. Because at a rural level, we're not even kind of getting to know what is going on, and all we hear is another farmer died by suicide. Failed relationships, a factor which is minimized, because you're supposed to, so what if he dumped you? So what if? Partner violence. India is especially reported very high rates of partner violence, and in this case what I would like to share is how, women continue in abusive relationships when they have the choice to get out. But the choice that they make sometimes is, I choose to end my life. Rejection, loneliness. My only source of company is Facebook, Insta. How many likes do I have? The UK has a minister of loneliness, I believe. Social isolation, trauma, chronic pain, and terminal illness. Inability to cope with external demands and internal resources. This inability to cope with external demands and internal resources. I was called in a couple of months ago on an emergency basis to a clinic where we got a call saying there is a 6th standard young boy who told his parents, I want to kill myself. And the parents, of course, had the sensibility enough to kind of get in touch with a medical practitioner in the family, took him there, and then they called one of us to meet up with him. And it was hard because I was meeting this boy for the first time, 6th standard. So we spoke about cricket, we spoke about sports, we spoke about racing, we spoke about games, and he finally came to, Ashish Bhaiya, what am I supposed to do? His body language was this, what am I supposed to do? You know what, I was trying to understand him. He's like, what am I supposed to do? So as I kind of investigated further, he said, I get 92, 93%. But when I come home, my parents' first reaction is, why didn't you get 95? Why didn't you get 98? And what he said, you know, I am trying my best. I'm not able to do beyond this. How much is his body language again was, how much more can I do? How much more can I do? I don't know, I'm not meeting their expectations. This conflict, internal conflict of this young sixth grader to think that suicide is the only way, because there is this tug of war between expectations and what I'm able to produce in reality. Now, we often ask, so what is it that a person with suicidal ideation is trying to achieve? What will be the solution? They want a solution, that is why. And they're not able to get one otherwise. And they look at suicide as the only solution. You know, the mind is like Star Wars. I want to end what is going on in the mind that point. I want to alter my consciousness. This unbearable psychological pain, and I'm going to touch on something which, when I was first exposed to this concept called psych-ache, P-S-Y-C-H-A-C-H-E, leg ache, psych-ache, where the pain reaches these intolerable levels. I can't take it anymore. Frustrated psychological needs. We anyway as a society have a tough time talking about what I need emotionally. Hopelessness and helplessness. The confusion, ambivalence, constriction. I remember in Dr. Anjali Chhabria's book on the chapter in homosexuality and suicide, there's a line where she says, when she's talking about a particular client who described this constriction, and he said, it is stuck in my throat. It won't come out. It won't go in. I want release. Escape. There is no other way out. And when we hear someone, I often tell families that the minute you hear the word suicide, do not take it lightly, because the person is communicating his or her intent. Now, we have, why do you think suicide has become a line of study? Why the term suicidology? Anyone? Why suicidology? Why suicide? You have theories on suicide today, because once again, it is an unattended reality. So if I had to just put up, and I'm not going to go through those in detail, you know, some of the theorists who have said what they have to say, there's negative and severe discrepancy between expectation and reality. Sixth grader, you know, expectation was 98. Reality is I'm doing my best. 93. You're not getting it. I'm not able to do beyond this. And then we often come and see or interact with individuals who, you know, kind of subject themselves to self-harm, you know. We often hear cutting has become a mode of behavior. What do you think the person is trying to do? He or she is trying to get release from something that he or she is not able to deal with or express. And we go, I'm going to come to this concept that I'm very fond of. And I remember when I first submitted my abstract for this presentation, I was all like, what do you mean by awfulize? you know, when we see someone cutting, we awfulize that behavior. AWFULIZE. You go, bad, 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 bad. But what you don't see is, don't ask is, why is the person cutting? Psychic, which I spoke about earlier. And when it comes to psychic, I want to talk specifically about a particular aspect that explains psychic so beautifully, where someone said, I want to stop living, but I don't necessarily want to die. I don't want to leave my loved ones behind, but the pain is too much to bear. And when someone shares that the pain is too much to bear, some of the responses we hear is get over it. People have real problems. And I'm like, really? Just because you don't understand the emotional, internal psych ache. You know, the ache is because of a fracture. You're like, oh, my poor darling. You know, I hope we get you painkillers. How many of you, and I don't want you to respond to this because that would mean in a certain way, you know, sort of outing yourself with your emotions. We've all at times felt a certain psych ache within. You know, of course, maybe we deal with it better. Better is a relative term. And then I'd like to talk about this concept which was introduced by one of the theorists, where he said, you know, they're time limited. Suicidal ideation could be time limited. And when there is a heightened sort of situation. And I remember reading something which very beautifully for me sort of helped me understand this concept, where it was said that I didn't want to die forever, just for that day, just for those moments when the pain seemed too much to bear. In that hour, suicide seemed the best option. And then there is Aaron Beck's concept of hopelessness, helplessness, that things won't change. You know, I'm very personally sort of affiliated towards Aaron Beck's concept of helplessness and hopelessness, because I feel, just in my limited capacity, that becomes the underlying common denominator to everything that is enumerator, whether it is a psychopathological condition, whether it is financial setback, whether it is relationship, whether it is isolation. The common denominator is we have an epidemic of helplessness and hopelessness going around, especially with the youth of today. So, any volunteer, how would you understand suicide? Just one word, or a series of one words. How would you understand suicide? Just give me one word. Okay, brilliant for starters. Yeah, 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 yeah. You know, for me, personally and professionally, I look at it as the absolute depth of despair. we heard about this aspect, rock bottom. If I have to go any lower, I sink deep down into the ground and disappear because I can't take it anymore. What do you think, if at all, whether personally or otherwise, if you've heard the statement being made to you, I want to kill, what's your first reaction? Just internal reaction. I'm not talking, don't, there's no right and wrong here. There's no judgment here. What would your first reaction be if someone told you, I want to kill myself? Okay? Yeah? Okay, I would just be. Yeah? I want to kill myself. What would your reaction be? It's no fun if you're going to be mute. And that's one of the essential aspects. You don't let the other person go mute. So, I'm sorry, ma'am. Yeah? Okay. Most people get frozen with that statement. You get stuck in time, in the moment of that statement. And your reactions are you crazy? Are you silly? You've got everything going for you. Stop, stop being a drama queen. I was trying to get the words right. You often hear that, right? Stop being a drama queen. Stop overreacting. Even if the person is in that moment overreacting, a lot of suicides take place on impulse. Your overreaction to the possible overreaction of someone with suicidal ideation could actually be shutting him or her down and pushing him towards a non-reversible mode of action. I want to get to this aspect of radical acceptance. And this is something that, took me a very long time to understand as I embarked on my journey years ago. And I'd like to quote it just the way it is. The act of embracing with your entire being what is being said, shared, and expressed. Removing the additional layers of reaction to what you do not understand, that you do not agree with, that you cannot comprehend, that you cannot fathom. And I want to focus on the words additional layers of reaction. I remember one of my professors at NYU making a statement that stuck onto me, where he said, it's never the thought that is the problem. It is a manner in which it is reacted to that either catalyzes action or slows it down and thwarts it. Your reaction is very critical to the person presenting suicidal ideation. Do you acknowledge that person's feelings, or do you reject it? Do you hear him or her out, or do you shut him down? Is there embracement, or is there rejection? Are factors that I'd like us to think about when it comes to the point of radical acceptance. And I often hear from people, how am I supposed to respond when someone says, I want to kill myself? And no matter how academic it may sound, some interventions that have proven very handy, even though you're quivering in your heart when you hear those words, are some of these, where I'm going to check if they pulled up the right slide. How are you doing with what you're feeling? I'm here and I want to listen. What can I do for you? Please share with me what you're feeling. What's the hardest part for you? Take all the time you need. I'm here. We're impatient with our reactions. What is it that you're feeling right now? I will be in touch. I'm here. I will call in. Can we go and meet someone together? Patience, being there, listening but not reacting. You know, we often think of conversation. The minute the person starts speaking, you're like, how am I going to react? How am I going to respond? You've stopped hearing, listening to that person. Because your focus is, how am I going to respond? You're not responding, you're reacting. You're safeguarding yourself. You know, you shut off because you're uncomfortable with what he or she is saying. That physical touch of assurance, if possible. Some of the no-nos is, absolute no-nos is, I understand how you feel. Really? You know, I mean, do you really understand when you make, we make that statement so matter of fact, right? I understand how you're feeling. No, you don't. Because if you would, your reaction would be very different. It's time to put this behind you. And that's exactly what he's telling you. Tell me how. Just don't tell me it's time to put this behind you. Tell me how. Be strong. I'm like, that's the most overrated statement. I'm not able to be. That's why I'm telling you I feel like killing myself. Either you tell me how, or like, okay, I was going to use a explicit, but I'm not going to use that. You will feel worse before you feel better. I'm not able to go through this worse. I don't even want to wait till it feels better. Another very overrated statement. This too shall pass. I can't wait. I want to end it now. And then the comparison. There's so many others suffering so much more. You at least have a roof over your head, shelter, good career, etc. I couldn't care less what others had. Right now, I'm not able to carry that load. I'm not able to take this forward. And what we do is we compare, with no disrespect to the suffering of other people, but we compare with zero reference to context. We may think, how my words going to impact the other person? But words have tremendous power. They reflect your empathy. They reflect your attempt to understand. The statement that has a lot of power is, I may not understand you, but I want to. Please help me understand your pain and suffering. Gayatri touched on a point about society. And we live in a society that does not do very well with talking about emotions. We don't do well with getting comfortable with the uncomfortable. Our responses invariably reflect, we either awfulize the person or their statement, or we minimize or oversimplify. I recall, a client in session telling me that every time I try to express myself, they either disregard my feeling, they either say, you're over-dramatizing, or they go, bad, 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 bad. Think about us. And he said, I'm barely able to think about myself in this moment. How are you asking me to think about you and putting that additional guilt on me? When you react, You perpetuate and you're a proponent to repression. You encourage suffocation. You make the person bottle up. Anything that bottles up will explode with dire consequences at some point of time. You know, we often wonder why people in the midst of a seemingly good and full life have chosen to die by suicide. And we've heard so many sort of known people in the last couple of years die by suicide. You know, Robin Williams, Anthony Bourdain, Kate Spade. You know, Heath Ledger was said to have died by overdose, but, you know, Gayatri spoke about the aspect of overdose. And while people never know, unfortunately, we ask the question after the person has died by suicide, why didn't he just say something? But he did. Maybe he did. I chose not to hear. I chose to reject. I chose to abandon. Because I was so uncomfortable with what he or she was saying. And then the person gets defined by the way he ended it. And I'd like to talk, before I come to my conclusion, about the word commit that Gayatri touched upon. You know, the dictionary meaning of the word commit is you're perpetuating a crime. When you use the term commit suicide, you're criminalizing and demonizing that person and his or her action forever. You're defining his or her closure with the word commit. No, there is no commit. He died by suicide. I want to close with two or three critical constructs. Patience, non-judgment, even though I may not understand. You know, people with suicidal ideation are not necessarily the easiest to deal with sometimes. There's irritability, there's hopelessness, there could be depression. And we kind of think of ourselves to be empathetic human beings. Human beings, by basis of existence, are supposed to be empathetic and compassionate. But in today's world, empathy is a competence that needs to be learned. We need to become capable in the art of non-judging. We need to hone the skill of trying to understand even though I may not agree, accept even though I may not understand. Before I close, I'd like to share the expressed narrative of someone who died by suicide. I would request you, if you're comfortable, close your eyes and very intently listen to these few lines. I feel a kind of pain and hopelessness that is maybe impossible to describe. How can I have gone on to being someone who loves life to wishing only to die? I feel cold. I feel agitated. I am in horror. I feel relentless despair. Everything in life is leaching away. I'm losing control of myself. I'm slipping away from my own hands. Everything is an effort all day and throughout the night. There seems to be no point, no nothing. My burden off me, to me, is intolerable. There seems to be no way out and an endless road ahead. Ending it seems to be the only choice. Take a moment, let that sink in, and just for yourself think, how would you respond to that? You could open your eyes. Just let that feeling stay for a bit and ask yourselves, how would you respond to someone who expressed that thought, feeling, emotion, pain, and heart? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ashish. It was wonderful having you. You actually began our conference with a big bang. The word comprehending was a true experience, feeling what they feel, understanding. Like you said, you can't really truly understand, but having that sort of empathy and having that sort of insight into probably what they're actually experiencing, a wonderful and a very effective presentation, I must say. And thank you very much. I think the term understanding why and the how will follow will always remain with me now. And yes, even after a long experience, I feel there's always a learning, and this was truly learning for me. Thank you so much. From the audience, thank you. From the audience, would anybody have any questions for Mr. Ashish and would want to ask anything about his presentation today or beyond?
Of course, we'll have that opportunity in the evening with Anjali and Harish as well, after the panel, there will be an opportunity for Q&A and for you to share, ask, discuss, Let it just sink in for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Beautiful moment. Thank you.